Okay, so welcome back to Lawrence Explains Online Academic Tuition. In this video, I'm going to take a look at the characters of Sheila and Mrs Birling from An Inspector Calls, and we're going to look at their actions, their morality, their motivations, and we're going to look into who they were as characters. So let's begin with Sheila. We have Sheila at the beginning of the play. Seems, somewhat a little bit removed from the reality that most people are living in. She's definitely the kind of the young, very, very privileged daughter of Mr. Birling, who has been very much sheltered from the realities of life in almost every way. We see in her early on in the play that she, when she hears of her father's dismissal of Eva Smith, which I've argued in another video, may have been a very legitimate dismissal. Although Mr. Birling is a buffoonish character, the business reasons for her dismissal would potentially be absolutely sound, something I've speculated on in a different video. And Sheila's response is compassionate. I think that was a mean thing to do. Perhaps that spoiled everything for her. And there's an ongoing discussion, and she later says, but these girls aren't cheap labour, they're people. So she takes a kind of humane and compassionate approach, at least on an emotional level. As I said before, whether it would have been realistic for Mr. Birling to keep Eva and the other people in the group of strikers, that's questionable, or whether it would have been realistic for him to meet their demands, that's highly questionable, given the competitive environment of commerce and manufacturing. But that aside, Sheila takes a very humane and compassionate view. So, in the episode with Eva Smith herself, obviously you probably know the episode by now, Eva's working in the shop. Sheila goes in there, she tries on I think it's a dress or a hat, and it doesn't suit her. And she sees Eva kind of smiling, and she also sees Eva wearing the dress as well, and it just kind of suits her beautifully. So it's basically a pang of jealousy, a pang of female jealousy, based on looks, essentially. And she says, I went to the manager at Millwoods and I told him that if they didn't get rid of that girl, I'd never go near that place again, and I'd persuade Mother to close our account with them. So she's using her social position, her financial clout of her father, and their position as consumers, basically to get Eva fired. And it's all based on Sheila's, emotional reaction to, a perceived slight on the part of Eva Smith. It doesn't seem like Eva's done a great deal in this case. And she says, because I was in a furious temper. So she's in a furious temper. We don't even know if Eva was laughing at her or was just smiling to be polite. We've got no idea why she was smiling. So it's really, a lot of this is in Sheila's own mind, and it's her own emotional response. So yeah, her actions really, I would say, are pretty much close to inexcusable. I would say. It's just it's purely a kind of emotion-based response, and it's actually extremely spiteful, in the sense that Sheila herself gains nothing from this. I'm going to come back to this at the end, but Sheila herself gains absolutely nothing. She's just in a foul mood, and that apparently takes precedence over Eva's ability to make a living. It's pretty grim, to be honest. There's a pretty astonishing level of selfishness and solipsism. I'd put this word here, solipsism. Is the feeling that you are the only person in the world that's important. I sense a little bit of this with Sheila in this interchange here. And she goes on to say she is remorseful. If I could help her now, I would. And at the end of the play, she seems to have learned something, in the sense that she says, you're pretending everything is just as it was before, but in her mind it's not, because they know that how they acted towards Eva Smith was at times cruel, and certainly in the case of Eva, certainly in the case of Sheila, very, very selfish. So she's remorseful, but again, I question. To be honest, I do question this. Is this just another emotional response? Oh, she feels remorseful now. At the time, she felt something else, so she acted in a completely different way. To what extent is that really moral? Just feeling remorse, like feeling an emotional sense of regret and pity. Yeah, it's a feeling, but so was the feeling of jealousy, which caused her to act in a different way. Has there been any deeper processing on the part of Sheila? Has she looked at her own, failings? I don't know. But people, critics often view, Sheila as she's a person, she's learned the lesson, and so on. But equally, it could just be another emotional swing on her part. She just feels in the moment, and tomorrow she goes off and she has she has a different emotion, and her life goes on. So the remorse, I think it's a transient thing, and it remains to be seen how much this is actually going to affect her in her life. Possibly does, possibly doesn't. We don't know. The case of Mrs. Birling. So she is an interesting character in the sense that she's obviously older. She's quite manipulative in a sense, and she uses manners and politeness as a shield to cover uncomfortable truths. This is a thing that she does frequently through the play. Let's just have a look at a few in quotations here. What an expression, Sheila. Really, the things you girls pick up these days. So she's kind of, positioning herself as a moral arbiter, as kind of above, the uncouth and rude young people. That I consider is a trifle impertinent to the inspector. Well, I must say his manner was quite extraordinary, so rude and assertive. So, she says this, often through the play, impertinent, rude, and so on. So by accusing people of being rude, it's a way of controlling dialogue. It's an attempt to control dialogue. Look out for that, by the way. It's something that you'll see people do who are not great with logic and reason. They will attempt to control dialogue by citing rudeness, offence, and so on and so forth. But ultimately, those things are difficult things to measure and to quantify. And in the case of Mrs. Birling, most of the things that offend her are just, the truth, essentially. She has this affinity for attempting to control dialogue through the use of manners and the notion of politeness. She's also a massive snob as well. We see several times through the play, there are times where she's a little bit embarrassed of her husband, Birling. He's obviously of a slightly lower social class, although he's very wealthy. And she kind of picks him up on several things. There's a quotation here, girls of that social class, in reference to Eva Smith. She talks, when she's talking to the inspector, of course, my husband was Lord Mayor only 2 years ago, so she's pulling rank, and she's not even pulling rank on her own, she's pulling rank via her husband. These are classic kind of snobby tactics, looking down, sneering upon people, and pulling rank on people. And also Mrs. Birling is totally unrepentant. I did nothing I'm ashamed of. In the case of Mrs. Birling, the question I have, is, I feel that there's an argument she's the worst character, she's the most morally reprehensible character, because the charity that she was in charge of was specifically to set up to deal with women who had basically, should we say, unwanted pregnancies or unplanned pregnancies. That was the whole purpose of the charity that she was administrating. And when Eva came to her, she basically, out of her own kind of sense of ego, because she felt slighted by Eva Smith's using their name, and her own sense of ego prevented her from carrying out the task that the charity was supposedly set up to administrate and to carry out. Not only did she not assist, but she quite possibly drove, quite possibly it really helped to drive Eva even further into a corner. Now, there's an overall pattern with both Mrs. Birling and Sheila, which is not, I don't think this is analysed enough, is that their own kind of perceptions of themselves and their own status games cause them to act in really inhumane and astonishingly selfish ways. The benefit that they get from their actions is so negligible, is so small. I mean, it's almost non-existent. It's just a kind of emotional one-upmanship. And the harm done to Eva, especially actually in the case of Sheila, the harm is very significant. There's no reason really for Sheila to go about things the way that she did. She's basically, Eva's lost her job. And what has Sheila gained? Nothing. A little sense of vengeance and one-upmanship. Mrs. Birling has turned Eva away. What she really gained out of it? Again, nothing, just a reaffirmation of her own importance and superiority, but she hasn't really gained anything. And so we have a negligible benefit, and yet they've caused quite a bit of damage, significant damage. Now, I would say in the case of the male characters, if we look at each of the male characters' interactions with Eva, Mr. Birling had good reason to dismiss her, certainly had a reason to dismiss her, probably a business reason. So he gained something in the sense he's protecting his business. In any case, the damage caused to her is not huge, it's not irrecuperable. And then Eric and Gerald, that we'll come on to, they, especially Eric, probably did mistreat Eva. But you can make an argument, at least they were looking to gain something. Like in the case of Gerald, it's a kind of romantic attachment. In the case of Eric, it's more of a sexual attachment. But there was at least some kind of a gain to them, although it may be a purely selfish one. In the case of Mrs. Birling and Sheila, they don't even gain anything. And, there's cruelty without any particular gain, and it's quite malicious and vindictive. So I think both of them come out quite badly, to be honest. Particularly Mrs. Birling. And Sheila, she obviously is repentant towards the end, but it remains to be seen, that it's only time will tell how much she would have actually learned anything from this experience. Hopefully she does. She's young enough for it to have kind of formed her. Maybe incentivized her in future to maybe be a little bit less volatile and perhaps, less jealous for something, over something as it's relatively trivial, just a female beauty sort of competition between the two of them, which Eva wasn't even aware she was in. That's Mrs. Birling and Sheila. That's a bit of a breakdown of their, should we say, sins in the play. Mrs. Birling certainly is irrecuperable, really, in the play. And Sheila, although it's often said that she has learned her lesson and she's like the new generation who is kind of about to change her ways, I would say, honestly, the jury should still be out on her, She's obviously quite emotionally volatile. Whether she actually does change her ways, fully and shift her perspectives, that will be something that could only be seen over a period of time. Hopefully it will be the case, but I think we can't really make too much of a judgment on her just based on what happens in the rest of the play. So I'm going to come back in the next video. I'm going to look at Eric and Gerald and their interactions with Eva and just their characters overall.